Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from Command Central at the Philanthropy Mastermind series, brought to you, as always, by our friends at DonorSearch. And unless my guests today are talking about DonorSearch, which they may, I don't know, we won't be talking about them much during the presentation today. And that's not because we don't love them. We do. If it were not for DonorSearch, not only would they do great work to help nonprofits figure out, frankly, who has the resources and, most importantly, the passion for our missions, but maybe more importantly, they've been helping us to provide an opportunity for you to hear from people like our guest today, now for nearly, 7 years and running. So we have a great presentation lined up for you, and I'm not going to give too much of an introduction to that today. And in fact, we cut out our prefatory slides and music today, so I hope you didn't miss that. But instead, we're going to have a full presentation adapted in part from one that was provided at the AFP Icon conference. So I'm sorry if you missed the conference, but at least you get a window on some of the best content right now, right here. So you'll enjoy that. In addition, I want to make sure I encourage you to do two things. One is to utilize the chat down at the bottom of your screen. So if you haven't opened that thing up yet, please do now. Just say hello. We would love that. If you would just say hi to the folks in the room, especially to the presenters, maybe just let us know where you're coming in from today. Which organization, if you feel like doing that, but certainly the city and state, or if you're from another country, we'd love to know that you're here too. So feel free to use the chat and just say hi. And here we go. So hello from the Wild Center in Tupper Lake. Thanks, Hillary. Appreciate you warming that up. And everybody else, please feel free to join her. Hi there from London. Thank you. I don't know if that's London, Ontario, or London, UK, but anyway, good to see you here. And hello from sunny Florida. And wow, Honolulu. Okay, so when we're done with the session today, we want to be visiting all of you. I think that's the upshot of it. So keep that coming. Oh, thank you, Palo Alto and University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Love it that you all are here. Stay with us. I know you're going to enjoy this today. Feel free also to use this space where everybody's saying hi from Canada, LA. This is great. Feel free to use this space not only to say hi to one another and talk, but also as a place to be a repository for your questions. I'll be monitoring all that today. We also have the more formal Q&A. So if you want to use that, that's fine too. Use whatever best suits you. I know you'll have questions. You may have comments, and there will be a place in the middle of the presentation as well as at the end where we definitely want to pull those into the conversation today. You have two people you definitely want to be having a conversation with. And so I'm not going to give a large introduction to them today because they have a lot to share with you. But of course, as you probably know, we have Cassie Carter, who is Cassie Carter, PhD, Vice President, West Regional Director at Campbell Company. If you don't know Campbell Company, by the way, as well as these people, I hope you'll look them up after we're done today. One of the leading firms in the business. And maybe more importantly to this, these two people have done the work. They do it every day, but they've also done it even before they did the work. So we're really, really pleased to have them. And joining her, of course, is Dan Nevez, PhD, once again, Vice President, Executive Search at Campbell Company. It'd be great to talk about that subject sometime, but we're going to jump into this one right now. And of course, that's the matter of, this whole issue of working with major gifts. So with that, I want to turn the baton over to Cassie and to Dan.
Cassie, you're muted.
Sorry. Dan, go ahead, kick us off.
Well, first of all, thank you all today for joining us, and glad to see Maddie from LA. I'm in LA, Maddie, as well. Creating a high-performance environment for major gifts. This is something that we have talked about. Jay mentioned that we did this at AFP Icon, and we're very happy and pleased to be able to give you a little bit about us. So we'd like to go ahead and just say welcome, and I want to go ahead and just share a little bit about both of us, and then we're going to launch into this presentation. So I'll start with Cassie's. Share a little bit about yourself before I go and share about me.
That sounds great, Dan. Thank you so much. So I'm, as Jay mentioned, I'm Cassie Carter, a Vice President with Campbell Company. I live in the LA area, and I work with organizations all across the US, but especially arts and culture, higher ed, human services. I'm originally a biologist, and so I come at everything from a data perspective. So you'll hear a lot of data today, which is part of my jam. And I've been working in programs and fundraising in the nonprofit sector for a scary amount of time, more than 30 years, and I've been with Campbell Company for 7 of those. Dan.
And my name is Dan Nevez. I'm a vice president of executive search for the West region for Campbell Company. And if you haven't heard about Campbell Company, if you heard about the certified fundraising executive exam, actually, that was written in our offices decades ago. So we've been involved with fundraising for a long time as a firm. I actually have 30 years of experience in both higher education, cultural institutions, and retained executive search for the first 20 years. I was a socio-economic historian and a curator for an academic museum before I kind of got lured out to do search 20 years ago. But it was for the Smithsonian Institution to find the head of a national museum. And I said, yeah, I'm happy to be on that team. I did such great work with them. They decided they would like to recruit me and hire me out of academia. I've been doing this work. It's a big joy for me to actually work with fundraisers. I have great respect for people who raise money because you are so resilient and tough, and you don't take a no. It's a no is a future yes. And so I'm really pleased to be able to share more about some of the things that we've learned and practices that we learned over our time together. So what we're going to start with the agenda today is that we're going to give you an overview of the national philanthropy trends and the Giving USA data. And that just came out for 2022, just came out in June of 2023. So we're going to cover that. And then what really works? What's the trends and lessons that we've learned in major giving? And these are not just built on what we're saying. These are built on some studies and surveys that we actually conducted. So to make sure we could get evidence-based practices that we can give to you. And then how do you build, assess, and retain a major gifts team? And then finally, maximizing your fundraising return on investment. And how do you do that with a high performance team and a good plan for that? So let's dive into some of the Giving USA data. And what I want to be share is that what we learned into 2022 is that $500 billion came in through a variety of sources, and these are the most common sources. Individuals brought in 64%, foundations was at 21%, bequests was at 9%, and corporations were 6%. Individuals actually, previous year was at 67%, so it actually dropped a bit. But what is interesting and why we're showing this and talking about major gifts is that not only is individuals just 64%, when you think about foundations, which about 40% of those foundations are private foundations, not grant-making foundations, and they're not all that way. And then you think about bequests, which are all gifts from individuals, and you think about the total percentage, you're really looking at 80% of that $500 billion that came in through contributions in 2022 actually comes in through individuals. And this is one of my favorite slides. It's just about the contributions by recipients. And then when I look at this slide, I always think about where the big pockets of money are coming from. Religion has been still dominant at 27%. Human services, education, and health get over 10% and more, including gifts to grant-making foundations. And then under that 10% range is public society benefits, which are schools or like the American Red Cross or United Way, those type of organizations. And then international affairs, but arts, culture, and humanities and environment and animals are at 5% and 3% respectively. And then there's a certain categories that gifts are simply through individuals. One of the things that my great colleague, Cassie, and I were talking about was how do you actually discuss this type of pie when you're thinking that you're coming out of the culture space, arts and culture space, and you're depressed because it's only 5%, that's not enough. But if you think about what your types of programs that you could go and approach donors, think about this as pockets of potential donors within the areas you could work from. Is there anything that you're doing on the educational side that could pick up the educational donors? Is there, in your cultural institution or organization, you're doing some kind of health component? One of the organizations I worked with was classical music. There's a health component around classical music about how it makes you smarter. It helps you make you healthier. It helps you bring calm to your world. Is there a way that you can think about approaching donors from these different contexts and ranges, which is important when you're thinking about major gift donors and prospects?
Thank you, Dan. And to take a look at trends over time and thinking about that $500 billion that was secured last year, that was actually a dip in giving. Not surprising considering everything that was going on in the world around us with the pandemic and civil unrest and concerns about, I'm gonna knock on wood as I say this, about a recession. A lot of donors were being cautious at the end of year. I'm really interested to see what happens in 23. What I'm hearing anecdotally is that donors are giving again right now, knowing that maybe in 24 with contentious election cycles, we might see some of that giving shifted. So one my take home message when I look at this data is that it always tends to go up, and we need to be investing as if it's gonna and not get too sweaty about seeing a dip. Also, one thing that does show that people are being a little more cautious when you look at the contributions for the percent of disposable income, we tend to hover as a nation around 2%. Last year, it went down to 1.7. I don't know if this is significant or not. We'll find out over time if people are being a little more cautious with their discretionary income. I personally would love to see the philanthropic community in the United States getting up closer to 3 or 4 or 5% of their disposable income. That's one of my goals, and that's what we're going to work towards with major gifts. All right, just to level set and bring us all together as to what Dan and I are going to be talking about over the next 45 minutes or so is what are major gifts and why do we want them? Why are we dedicating all this time and energy and thinking about major gifts? A lot of different ways to define them. So gifts are often meaningful to both the organization and the individual. People are thinking when they make a major gift. It's not just sort of a quick end of year check. Depending on the organization that you're coming from, a major gift threshold could start at $1,000. Some it starts at 10,000 or 25,000. A lot of universities that I work with, a major gift threshold actually starts at 50,000. Some arts institutions, it might start at 100,000. Whatever that level it starts at, it reflects your donor base and it reflects how the donors are engaging with you. So it's a number that varies and often increases as you go through your organizational development. They're generally a result of a longer term relationship. They're generally a result of a direct ask. Major gifts that come in without an ask, I always feel like, ooh, there's opportunity there. If you didn't ask and they sent you 10,000, there's opportunity there. And for the most part, what Deanna and I are going to be talking about today are gifts that come from individuals or individual relationships. Even if the gift is coming from a family foundation or a corporation, we're really looking at this relationship building concept. And then when you think about your toolkit and how you work towards major gifts, you've got lots of different kinds of activities as a fundraiser that you are pursuing. And I tend to think of annual fund and events, especially as your pipeline for your major gifts. So important to have, but not always going to be your giant moneymaker. You've got foundation grants, you've got corporate sponsorships, planned gifts, and then stewardship. And part of the reason that we have stewardship on this slide is it's one of the most important reasons that people do or don't give to an organization. When we talk to donors who have stopped supporting a specific organization, it's often because they did not feel valued or they did not feel well stewarded. When people increase their giving, you can get them up from an annual gift to a mid-level gift to a major gift. It's often because they feel appreciated and they feel like you as an organization know who they are and you value their giving. So stewardship, incredibly important. And then when we think about how we invest our time, we've got all these tools. Where do you put your time to help your organization be the most successful it is? And as Dan was saying, we love fundraisers, we love fundraising. From my perspective, coming from the program side, I know that we are people who are dedicated to the nonprofits that we work with. We want them to be successful. And fundraising is one of the best ways that we can contribute to their success. So we look at our toolkit of how we're going to do that. And we've got annual fund, major gifts, planned giving, events, all those kinds of things. You see right off the bat that events is one of the most expensive ways to raise money. Out of every dollar that you secure, it takes about 70 cents on average, depending on your event, to secure that dollar. Major gifts, you see that it's like 11 cents for every dollar that you receive. And then even more impactful, return on investment. And I just love this slide and I love the data that goes with it. The time and energy that you spend on major gifts pays off. And so over time, your events, again, they're your doorway. You want events, they're important for you, but they're not going to be necessarily, in all cases, the income generator that's going to run your organization, is going to grow your organization. Same thing with annual fund. But planned giving and major gifts are going to be the sort of heart and soul of how you really grow your financial support with your donors over time. It also tends to be the most stable. Once you secure and build a major gifts program, it tends to be the most stable source of income, more so than grants, because funders, they'll give for 2 or 3 years, they want to launch a new program, and then they want you to be weaned. And events, lots of time and energy into them. So it's a good investment. All right. Spending a little bit of time talking about what is it that we learned from the research that we did around characteristics that are shared by organizations that have a really strong and robust major gifts program. We did online surveys. We interviewed more than 120 nonprofits. We talked with development leaders and people who work throughout the organizations. Spent a lot of time crunching data, and we added it with the data that we have from the Giving USA data. So part of what we've learned is that organizations are investing more and more into major gifts, and that they're seeing the payoff. They're seeing a significant increase overall in their fundraising when they do invest in it. One of the really exciting things about the nonprofits that we surveyed is that they had received at least one gift of $1 million or more after they were investing in major gifts. So a significant payoff. And we're seeing that the number of organizations that are spending staffing resources on major gifts has been increasing over time. Key, really important when you're thinking about how you invest your organizational resources, that organizations that have at least one full-time major gift fundraiser has increased the number of $10,000 and up gifts by more than 50% when they invest in that. It takes a while for a fundraiser to get ramped up. It's a significant investment. This is often one of your higher, and Dan will lead into this a little bit, one of your higher paying team members, but it really pays off when they can focus on major gifts. The more you clear the runway for them, the less administrative responsibilities they have, the less they're producing a newsletter or producing a event or producing an annual fund, and the more they're focused on this external outward facing activity, the more you're going to see the payoff around the major gifts, because they're building these relationships.
And Cassie, that point is always something I always talk about, that 54%, because when you think about hiring a major gift officer and you're raising $500,000 in major gift revenue, that means you're adding $250,000 right there on that hire. That's worth the hire when you add that leader.
Yeah, it really is. It's a worthwhile investment. And then what are some of the tools that a major gift officer or anybody in an organization who are raising major gifts, what are some of the tools that we see across the board that they have at their disposal? One is a really strong case for support. Being able to talk about what you're fundraising for and why, and what change it's going to make, the difference it's going to make in the organization is very compelling. And this is actually harder than it seems. A lot of us understand with our organization what we could do if we had more funds, but how do you explain that in a way that's compelling and succinct to somebody outside of the organization? And think about answering the question, if you had a donor who said to you, if I gave you my $10,000 this year, what difference is it going to make? What are you going to do with it? You want an answer that isn't transactional. You want an answer that doesn't make it a really restricted gift, because you don't want to say, well, we really need this piece of equipment. You want an answer that's inviting that person to join you and become a part of your community, so that they're really supporting the mission and the vision of your work, and they aren't just investing in helping you pay a bill. Leadership, incredibly important in major gifts, because people give to people that they trust, that they respect, that they believe in, who are credible. And so the staff and the board members are key team members on your major gifts team. I think of them as a strategy team or a natural partner. Major gifts is not a solo activity, it's a team activity. And sometimes that gets lost. I've worked at universities where some of the major gift officers kept their portfolios really tight and close, and they didn't want to share with anybody. They were missing wonderful opportunity to connect and deepen relationships. So it's not a solo. Donor engagement. So you probably have a bigger list of potential major gift donors than you know what to do with. So how do you learn to focus? And creating a system that is data-driven, that allows you to prioritize, really key in a successful major gift program. And being able to track your activity, track your momentum, build a plan for people, and have lots of touch points for those people as you go through the year. Those are the ways that you see successful major gifts. I was talking to a land trust on Tuesday, and their executive director, he's a really great data nerd, and he was saying that he tracked they have a development director and him, and they do the fundraising. He said he tracked the number of touches that they did for everybody who gave a gift above $5,000, and he said it took 5 to 12 touches for each donor. It's like, yes, that 6 to 8 fits right in there, and he was the proof of that. Again, just to underscore that you need to focus on major gifts. You need to have the time and the energy. It's a different kind of activity than when you're in your office, your head is down and you're working on logistics for an event. The more administrative responsibility you have, and I think of this sometimes as the cholesterol in the system, the more gooped up you get, the harder it is to get out there and do your major gift fundraising. It's a whole different approach. And so you need to be in an environment where you are supporting the major gift officers to be up and out. I've worked in places where every time the major gift person was heading out to meet with somebody, all the other sort of home-based team members were rolling out. Oh, they're going out again. They're having the fancy lunches. Those lunches are hard and they're important, but a lot of times that work is you're building relationships, and you need to be in an environment where you have the space to go and do that. And then you need to have access to leadership. You need to be able to come back and say, this person is really excited about these things. Can I introduce you and have you help build or deepen that relationship? A couple other statistics and things that we learned through our research. One is you need to build a plan and you need to work the plan. If you have a deliberate development plan as part of your strategic plan, it's tied into what you're doing as an organization, you have a much greater chance of successfully securing major gifts than if you are sort of shooting from the hip, so to speak. Another thing that I love about major gifts, campaigns. Campaigns are a wonderful, fabulous organizing construct around giving an organization purpose and direction. And you don't always want to be in campaign. And if you don't need a campaign, don't go into a campaign. But campaigns are a great way to really elevate everything that you're doing, bring together your messaging, your boards, your staff around a common purpose. And you often see organizations getting ready to go into campaign, and they're very reliant on events, and they're very reliant on annual fund. And then they start to build and deepen these relationships through the campaign activities, and they come out the other side and they've got a robust major gift program. It's just a wonderful thing to see. 90% of the organizations that we talk to, the board of directors is actively involved in the major gifts. This doesn't mean necessarily that they're out there doing the asking, but they're at least partnering with staff, and they're serving as a credential. They're going along on visits, or they're opening doors, and they're saying, hey, I'm a part of this organization. It's important to me. And this is why, out of all the things I could do with my time, I am volunteering here at this organization. And I think you should be joining us. It's a very powerful credential, and organizations that are successful in major gifts have a board that's comfortable with that. They built that conversational muscle. And then leadership. Head of the organization is involved, and it's really important to be involved over time.
And Cassie,
All right.
I was just going to say, just one of those interesting things about the campaigns is that when we did that survey for the organizations, either almost close to 95% of them were either in a campaign or planning for a campaign. And so that's where that success as a construct is really important, because that's impressive that we saw that kind of number of work that's going on.
Absolutely. It's something that most organizations are thinking about in some fashion, because you've got big things you're doing, and that means you need a big investment. And I will underscore what Dan just said. One of the things that I have learned is it's harder to raise $2 or $3 million a year without a campaign than it is to raise 20 million in a year with a campaign. bigger vision, bigger activities attract larger gifts and larger donors. That's part of the reason I love it. And then super important for a robust major gift program is to have clarity in roles and to have metrics that are measuring the important activities that move a major gift program forward, that move a major gift program ahead. So you want to have donor interactions that actually have substance to them. They're meaningful donor interactions. You need touches, you need light touches, you need things that are in between, but ones where you're having conversations with donors about what's important to them, what they want to accomplish with their philanthropy, and how their philanthropy can help advance your organization. Those are the kinds of conversations that really result in big gifts. Also, having relationship managers. So if you've got portfolios, having a relationship manager who guides and tracks and shepherds the deepening of a relationship with the donor, very important. That doesn't mean that that person has to be the only person who interacts with the donor. It doesn't mean that person is out there with that donor all the time. It means that person is tracking the strategy, and sometimes they're deploying the CEO or the executive director. Sometimes they're deploying a board member. Sometimes they're deploying a program leader in your organization. But to have that knowing that somebody is paying attention and making sure that things are happening, really important. And keeping in mind that concept of the right person, the right ask, the right time. The relationship manager should be developing a plan for what that is and making sure that that you're really being strategic in that development. When we did some listening to leaders in philanthropy around things that they did to really see a difference in their major gifts program, Jay would love this. One of them told us we started using DonorSearch. In other words, they invested in both wealth screening and research around who their donors were, what kinds of things they gave to, what they were interested in. Focus on development efforts, really actually investing in the organization, not having it be a side thing. A lot of organizations create a strategic plan, and then they start to think about how are we going to pay for this. Think about the fundraising growth as part of your strategic plan. Donor database. You need to track what you're doing. You need to see changes over time. You need to remember the last time that you had a touch. You need ticklers to remind you to reach out to people. Don't forget that stewardship piece. And creating systems in your portfolio structure that allows you to prioritize. So hot, warm, cold lists are good. I like ones that are like 1, 2, and 3 for readiness. So I'm keeping an eye on, okay, this person is getting close to being ready to be asked. What can I do in the next 60 days to get them ready to ask? So these kinds of themes are consistent across high-performing organizations. And then, we see this in gift tables. Out of 100 prospects that you have potentially in your portfolio, only about a third of them are going to be ready to be asked at any given time. And some of that is just because of the nature of our energy and the ebbs and flows of our work. If you had 100 people that were ready to be asked all the time, unless you had an army, you wouldn't be able to manage that. So that represents the focus that you have. All donors need regular stewardship. Building a balanced portfolio, depending on who you are in the organization, the kind of work you're doing, and sort of the level of maturity, quote unquote, of your organization will depend on what your portfolio looks like. If you were a newer person at an organization, or you are a major gifts officer that is just getting ramped up, your portfolio may have a lot of people in there that you're qualifying, and fewer people that you're actually ready to solicit. And it evolves over time. Larger organizations should consider specialized portfolios. And by this, what I mean is you might need a portfolio that is just people you're qualifying. It's like a fishing pond, and you pour it into the different fundraisers' portfolios. And as they work to qualify, they either disqualify them as a major gift prospect, or they move them under management and they're doing work with them. I love stewardship portfolios. Stewardship portfolios allows somebody to focus on the people who either are done what they're giving for their organization. Maybe they've done a planned gift and that's their ultimate gift. Maybe they've done a really big campaign gift. You want to make sure that you're not trying to develop strategy around that person, but you're showing them the love. Some fundraisers will pad their portfolios with people that they know are going to give every year, no matter what. I think we've all had this donor who sends you $10,000 no matter what you do or say every single year. You don't want to be developing strategy around that person. You want them to be stewarded really well. So take them out of a portfolio, put them in a stewardship portfolio. These strategies buy space for your major gift officers, for your major gift leaders to be thinking about the people that need deliberate, structured strategy implemented over time. And you want to give them that space. Giant portfolios are not helpful. If you are a really focused major gift officer, a portfolio of 75, in my experience, is plenty. So how many people do you want to have under management? These means these are people that you are actively developing and implementing strategy for, as many as you possibly can, but not so many that you can't actually implement it. So industry standards are, 100 to 200 prospects for a full-time frontline fundraiser. You see that especially in universities. I think you need to give yourself the space to think about that carefully and think about the type of organization you are in and what your donors are already used to doing. If you are in an organization where everybody's used to giving to your event every year and you're trying to get them into a major gift mindset, you might have a larger portfolio at that time because you're starting to build different kinds of activities for them. But when you're really ready to solicit, you want to have a laser focus on that. And what is that sort of, how do you use the donor cycle, the donor stages to advance your work and think about your portfolios? Membership, sort of annual giving, events, those are your entries, those are your gateways, those are your pipeline. Once people feel well stewarded and they're making annual gifts, you can start to think about whether or not they have the capacity to give more, and you upgrade them maybe into mid-level or major gift prospects. You are always going to be re-qualifying people after they make a gift and see what that meant, and is there another gift on the horizon, and what's the time frame for that. But knowing that you've got people that are in these different readiness levels, these stages really indicate how ready are they to make a gift to your organization. You want to make sure they're moving through. If somebody sits in cultivation for 2 years, either you haven't found the right strategy for them, or they really need to be disqualified. So be comfortable throwing people out of your portfolio so that you're focused on the people who are ready to make gifts right then and there. Disqualifying is a gift. It's not a it's not a sad thing. You're not condemning somebody to that. I'm working with a hospital right now, and there was a major gift officer who I've known for years and years, and I love and adore. She never ever wanted to disqualify anybody. So they've got listed in their database something like 10,000 prospects that she identified. They're not all prospects. They're wonderful people. You can disqualify them. It's okay. Keep your focus tight. And then lastly, before I hand it to Dan, if you've got younger, newer career people in your organization who are learning how to do major gifts, think about giving them portfolios where they can start to advance and build the pipeline. And this is where some of those specialty portfolios might come into play. This is where you can have, where you're trying to start to graduate your transactional donors into a major gift mindset where they are investing in you as an organization. They're not simply helping pay a bill or doing something for benefits. And let them gradually build their portfolio where they start to see some success. And the last thing that I'll just say is, I'm looking at this members and annual donors. If you are an organization that has a strong membership base, so maybe you're a place-based institution, you're an aquarium or a park or a zoo or something really wonderful like that, botanical garden, those members are super tough to convert into annual fund donors or into major gift donors. And so think about whether they are a donor that is going to, that is a member because they're showing solidarity with you and you can convert them, or are they a member because it makes economic sense? And again, be comfortable disqualifying that. All right, that was a lot really fast. I'm going to hand it to Dan.
So Cassie has covered the why for major gifts. She's covered the strategies for major gifts and how to engage with the donors that you need. Now, I want to go back to that 54% increase of major gift revenues when you add one major gift officer, because this is the information that you actually want to share with your finance office, with your CEO, with your board, to say, why is it important that we actually invest in hiring a major gifts team, and what is the potential of it? So the next step is how to hire and keep a high-performing team. And that's a pretty tough problem these days. Next slide. Is that the cost of turnover in the development field is very real. And so we have heard this, but many of you all know this already, that it's pretty much a 1.5 to 2 years is the average time for a fundraiser to actually be in a role. And the reason for that is not the fundraiser's fault. Probably about 60 to 70% of the time, it's the fault of the organization, because they're not ready for a fundraiser, or they're not supporting a fundraiser, or they're actually giving unrealistic expectations upon a fundraisers, but not allowing the time to grow the culture of philanthropy within the organization. Again, or they're spending 50% of their time basically doing administrative tasks. I talked to a head of development just recently about that. How much time are you spending? He said 50% of my time is fundraising, 50% of my time is administrative. And that's the only fundraiser in the organization. So it's not a good investment at that time. And then what is the direct cost and indirect cost of fundraising? Can we go back to the next slide, Cassie?
Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, in that this is a number that was set in 2012, but really, what is the cost of losing a fundraiser? Actually is, there's a study by the Center of American Progress and SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resource Management, has done studies on this. You're actually going to lose the value of about 200% to 300% of their salary. So if you're paying somebody at $120,000 for their salary, you lose that person because somebody left your organization to get $5,000 more or $10,000 more so they can increase their salary. Your loss to your organization through direct and indirect costs are going to be $240,000 or $360,000. That's a real cost that is there. You can go next slide. So it's a very competitive landscape for major gift talent. So we did a study on alternative fundraising talent, which I'm going to dig deeper on when we talk about it. But this was a startling number that we ran into. We were actually reaching out with universities and colleges and academic medical centers, these type of organizations, because they had big major gift teams. Like, what were your problems that you were dealing with hiring, retaining leaders? And 70% responded that they were all struggling to hire and retain frontline major gift officers. And the competition really for this type of major gift officer is very fierce, and it's very real. But the short times on tenures that you're seeing, like 16 months, 18 months, when it actually takes 18 to 24 months to raise a major gift, that is actually bad for the nonprofit sector, but it's really bad for donors within your organization and new donors as well, because they get lost in the shuffle. And that's another hit of cost that's affecting the organization. And then how do you assess talent? Now that you want to hire a new major gift officer, what's the best way to assess them? And one of the things I always urge leaders is to measure first and then qualify second. What does that mean? Really is focus on what are the performance metrics that you want to be able to focus on with this major gift officer, and then set your questions around those key areas. So you should be focusing, when you interview someone, on an interview process where you're listening to learn. What you're really focusing on is those metrics: years of experience, easy to see on a resume, tenure length, that's easy to see. But really, you're focusing on the size of secured gifts and funding growth patterns. And then take all these metrics, apply it all equally across the board, which each of the candidates, So to make sure you're measuring on par, apple to apple, oranges to oranges, lemons to lemons, whatever you're doing, make sure you're focusing on that. And then you can get into the, would this person be a good culture fit? Will this person be an ideal fit for my team? Is this somebody that I could really work with? Let's focus on that as the second part of it. Next slide. And then here's some sample interview questions that you can use to just kind of structure your interviews that you can have it. One of the first questions I want to know is, why are you interested in the mission? To me, the mission is the most important driver for the success of this leader. And why did you choose a career in fundraising? And in many cases, many fundraisers actually have shorter tenures. So in some cases, most of the time when you're actually looking for a leader, they're actually going through a transition themselves. So you just ask them, why did you lose your last job? What you're listening for in that question is, was the reason outside of their control, or was that within their expanded control? And if it was outside their control, which is usually at least 60% of the time a fundraiser leaves an organization, then you want to listen for that. When they're getting a little bit gray in the response, then you should say, well, you know, if we actually called your manager at some point and did a reference with them, what would they say is the reason? That will probably give you more clarity on the reason for leaving. And then what do you consider one is your most successful role in fundraising and why? But really get into the granular parts. What did you raise in 2022? What did you raise in 2021? And then what happened in 2020 when you first started? Where was fundraising? Get an understanding about the growth pattern that they had over their career span or at the organization that they were at. And then what was the most complex gift and why? So next slide. What you're really looking at is these four areas. You're focusing on mission alignment, you know, and to me, the person who's passionate and dedicated to the organization, they're going to give you 110%. Versus somebody who this is not a passion for them. You just can't have somebody hire them with their fundraising toolkit and come into an organization where that's not really a passion for their own mission. They're not going to be a successful, high-performing leader. And then focus on those evidence of growth for high performers, which are simply, they make more visits. They secure new donor prospects. They secure and close gifts faster. So instead of 18 to 24 months, some of them hit 12 months. 14 months. They secure high yield gifts. They set high standards of excellence for themselves, and they seek to exceed goals. You're listening for that and the pattern of increasing complexity around the work that they do as well. And then there's the soft skills, listening, resilience, being self-started, driven, eager to learn. Those are really important categories that you're listening to. That's the qualification pieces that you're listening to. Beware of implicit bias, unconscious bias at all costs. One of the things that I always do if I'm going to talk to a fundraiser, I always talk by phone first, because I don't want bias to creep into a conversation through a Zoom call so that I'm distracted by certain things that you're going to see on this list. But the most common things that I always hear are the wrong things where people do hires is that, but Dan, I had a gut feeling that this person was really a great fundraiser. I just could feel it in my gut. Or they just reminded me of when I was coming out in fundraising and what I really wanted to do. And that's really not really good data that you're thinking about to understand if this is a good fit. But here's the bias: gender, race, ethnicity, personal style, the way they dress, maybe communication style. They may be shaking their hand a bit, and you go, well, they're kind of nervous. And it could just be an invisible disability that you don't understand. Height, weight, these are things that you want to avoid when you recruit and talk to leaders. So let's talk about, I'm at an organization, Dan, and we don't have any opportunity to get to fundraisers because we're a rural organization or we're a small nonprofit. And, some of these bigger nonprofits, they actually are paying better than us. So we did a study on alternative fundraising talent. And what we found out through this, and something I just mentioned previously, is that for these organizations where they actually have major gifts teams, and these were a lot of universities and higher education institutions and colleges that we were looking at to see it, that 88% of them said that they were having challenges simply because they didn't have a lack of qualified candidates that they could actually have. And their geography of the institution was very offset. So somehow they were not close to a density of where you would expect to see major gift officers, which are medium to large cities. And then compensation, salaries. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but that's another big factor. And it's the most important factor of why people cannot recruit high-performing talent. So large campaigns require big teams. I'm sorry. Go back to the slide, Cassie. Qualified talent is just not cheap. I'll talk a little bit about that, but really the big question is, what does qualified mean? So what is a new way we can think about alternative talent as well? Next slide. So 64% of our respondents actually said that they were intentionally recruiting non-traditional talent for direct fundraising positions. So the majority was actually already in that. And here's where they were looking. On the left side, you can see the non-traditional hires roles. They're not surprising in some of the areas, but here's a toolkit for you to think about where you want to be able to talk to people from, to think about as an opportunity for them to be able to become a major gift officer. Bankers make good ones, wealth managers and financial planners, attorneys. These are relationship builders. They already understand the work of relationship building. Real estate brokers and political campaigners actually do make good leaders as well. Admission officers in schools, they actually found out that they actually make good fundraisers simply because they're in that relationship building mode with families and students and things like that as well. So let's talk about, once you hire them, how do you keep them? So this is our next step. And one thing that Cassie was making very clear in her discussion was that fundraisers really do need clear understanding of their roles, and they need to have reasonable expectations of what is set for them. Major gift officers have to have the metrics that they can be able to achieve, but you have to actually reward the achievement of those goals as well in some way. And then create ambitious but achievable goals, and then implement a formal review process. Make sure you're talking to this fundraiser to make sure that you agree together, here are the 3 to 5 goals that we want to set for you. And making sure that there is a meeting of minds, that there is an agreement on that, and not just a top-down, here's what your goals are, good luck. And then I love continuous learners. I think that they make great leaders, but it really, continuous learning are for high performers pays off, and it actually ensures loyalty and stronger tenures when you allow staff to really come in and help them assess their own skill set, and then really think about charting the job that they want to be. Do they want to be the future you as the head of development? Help them to get to that level at most possible, and then identify the gaps to fill them for whatever they need to be in their next future, and know that their commitment to learning, going to AFP meetings, joining philanthropy masterminds, having these meetings and trying to learn more, is that it's going to be rewarded for that as well. Are you paying enough? So that's a big question I always get. Dan, are we paying enough for our chief development officer or major gift officer? And most of the times it's a no. And on the left side, I just want to give you a slice for a city, a major metropolitan city, where market salaries are for major gift officers. So you can see where small colleges, large universities, healthcare institutions, small, medium nonprofits to the top tiers. These are expensive. LA is expensive to live. But my point is, for this structure, is that if you're thinking about hiring your first new head of major gift officer, you might look at these small colleges. You might look at more of the smaller, medium nonprofits. Those might be a good areas where you can have somebody who actually has experience. And then, as we learned from the pandemic, workplace flexibility becomes the biggest demand that we're seeing from talent these days. That was true even before the pandemic. It's just frontline fundraisers are not best be sitting in their desk or in their office all the time. They should be out meeting with people, and you should allow that flexibility for them. And it's something that is something you don't have to pay on a salary. So why not have that as much as possible? Family-friendly policies really are valuable for employees who have families so that they can balance their work and family, and any kind of parental leave actually builds loyalty for an organization. And then let's talk a little bit about performance-based incentives. And you're going to say, Dan, I don't even have an incentive. What are you talking about? Well, this is something that is actually happening a little bit more, and it's more prevalent. And this is something that I worked on a study just because I wanted to understand where these incentives were coming. So this was one of the first pioneering studies on this. And what we found out in what I heard always from fundraisers is that, well, that's not ethical to get an incentive. And actually, that's not true. AFP long ago set that it's not a sales commission, as long as it's not a sales commission, but a set of preset mix of revenue and non-revenue goals, then there's an opportunity for them to have an incentive. And organizations, and here's just a number of them, you can see through CASE, which is the educational fundraisers, AFP, which is more general, and AHP, which is the healthcare philanthropy fundraisers. They are prevalent, and actually these numbers are a little bit older. They're actually more prevalent than they are today, and they're actually increasing. And what we found out is that there's 3 types of performance incentives. One is the annual incentives, which was 94%, and that can be anywhere from 5 to 30% of a base salary. So the most common is about 10 to 12%. 10 to 12% is the most common incentive for a major gift officer. So say a person comes in, they're making $100,000, and you say, we're going to give you a 10% incentive on top of that. If you hit all your 5 targets, you'll get the full 10%, which will be, meaning you're going to be, instead of 100, you'll be at 110. If you only hit 3 out of the 5, don't worry, you're going to get part of your incentive. You'll get $6,000, so then you'll be at $106,000. So I think you might understand how that would work for other types of salaries. And then there's a recruitment incentive, which is simply a signing bonus. If you want to bring somebody in and they say, look, I have to be at 130. That's the number I have to be able to come in. You can only pay them 120. You can say, well, look, we'll pay you 120,000 salary, but we'll add a 10,000 signing bonus so we can hit the number you need to be at. You come in, you do great work over the next 8 to 12 months, we'll get you there closer to the 130. And then multi-year incentives, which simply are incentives that are used in campaigns, which act as retention over the campaign period. And that's actually less prominent as well. And so here's something to think about when you think about what are going to be the metrics that I set for my major gift officers. And see, this is what we were seeing around the incentives and how they were set. And I think this was helpful because as when I talk about that preset mix of revenue categories and non-revenue categories, you get a sense of, on the left side of the screen, a lot of opportunities where you could set those non-revenue categories. And then on the right side of the screen, you can see where the key revenue targets usually are, which are just money in, new gifts, and new pledges as well. Cassie?
Right. So keeping an eye on the time, and we've covered a ton of information. Just to give us a super quick review, and thank you, Dan, for all of that. You've got some key ingredients that are really important as you build a major gift program, and people are clearly probably your most important ingredient. And we had some key takeaways, but I'm going to open it up to Jay to see. I saw some questions coming in through the chat. What do you want to throw at us? I saw a few interesting things coming in.
Yes, we did have a couple in there and some comments about whether or not people were using things like performance-based incentives at their organizations, and also if they'd come from other fields, non-traditional hires. So a lot of that has to do with the latter part of the presentation, but I know all of this really resonated. So thank you. And by the way, thank you for the shout outs to DonorSearch. I'm sure they'll appreciate that. And to Masterminds. That was really nice of you both. So one question that came in earlier had to do with, let me see, I want to make sure I back up to it. It came in quite early, and it was about what you mean by investing in major gifts. And I know you talked about that a lot of different ways, but maybe you can do a quick reprise about different ways you can invest.
Yeah, I saw that question when it came in. I thought that's a great question. And I think what Dan and I mean by investing in major gifts is a couple of things. Mostly it's around creating an organizational focus on major gifts and having dedicated staff time, whether that's hiring a dedicated staff person and doing the kinds of things that Dan was talking about to really set that person up for success, or whether it's ensuring that you've got staff and board that can focus on that. And it's really around an organizational culture and an organizational approach that is valuing and supporting the major gift process.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen a lot of organizations that grow and shrink, especially if they're thinking about capital campaigns. So do you make cases within organizations or with staff leadership or boards about making sure that there's some kind of level of consistency, at least as they think about strategic planning, so they don't ever underinvest? They don't do one of these mass purges and then suddenly they're desperate for hires later?
Those mass purges are disastrous. And what happens in those mass purges, and Dan and I both work with organizations that have done that, where they staff up for a campaign and then they get done with the campaign and they deconstruct everything. You've got a bunch of donors who came along with you in that campaign and received a certain level of stewardship and investment. They are invested in you. And when you do a mass purge, all of a sudden those donors are hearing crickets. And to rebuild when you're going into the next campaign, or you need them just to help you maintain your level because you've come up to a new level through your campaign, if you're not stewarding and engaging in those relationships, you lose them. And rebuilding them is tough and expensive.
Wow. Thank you for putting a fine point on that. Dan, do you have anything to add to that, or should I jump into the next question?
Yeah, jump to the next question.
Okay. Let me see. So it was about introducing the case for support. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. So we all write them. They're not always everything they could be, but anyway, we do write them because they're essential. But how do you introduce them?
Boy, yeah, and the case is such a tough piece. What I think about with a case for support, and often we put a tremendous amount of time in writing this beautiful prose, this beautiful narrative around that. The most important thing about a case is that the people who work in your organizations, your volunteers, your board, your staff, have clarity and can speak in their own words about what you are doing as an organization and why you're focused on this fundraising effort. And so the most important thing that you can do is tell stories. Jay, you mentioned this at the beginning, to be able to tell a story about the accomplishments of what this campaign or what this fundraising effort is going to achieve, and have real life examples and have each person be able to say that in their own words. So one thing that I do often when I'm working with boards is, or even with staff, is I'll have them go around the room and say their mission statement or say part of the case for support in their own words. You need to be able to talk about it.
Right. And just to add to that question, because I want to make sure I didn't miss part of their point, which is sometimes this is a matter of whether you're in person, you're doing that, going around the table and giving testimony, right? And another part is, well, are we talking about it virtually? Like in a feasibility study, and so many of those have moved to virtual kinds of settings. So how do you feel about that as the point of introduction? Is it a person literally handing something to someone so they can do that? Is it sending it along and then setting up a meeting? And if so, is that virtual? Is it in person? Does it matter? I know this is a lot of logistics, but you've seen what's happened the last 3-4 years. Do you see a difference in whether it's right there in shouting distance, or if it's thousands of miles away?
Such a great question. And so one of the things that we have done more recently through the work we do at Campbell is we have created cases for support that are actually on a website. And sometimes they include a lot more imagery that way. They include less text. They include sometimes videos. We send that in advance to the potential donor. We often have a cheat sheet that has the key priorities that's on like a one-pager that we will also send and resend before we talk about it. We have found that older donors like to print all that out, so you have to create a version that's printable. But to use electronic versions of things is powerful.
Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge Ashley's comment in the chat about really loving the idea of the mission statement in someone else's, someone's own words, which I know it's often invested in a case statement, but there's something about doing the stuff in real life. Using video as another component, which I know is something that many people are doing. That kind of testimonial all can be pretty powerful. And Dan, I want to turn to you for just a second. You did these. First of all, I was knocked out by the cost of turnover piece because I love ROI related statements. And if there's anything that could be powerful, it's, well, yeah, but you lose somebody, you lose 2 to 3 times the revenue of what the cost is for that person, which I thought was a great, easy way to make the case that you need to hold on to people. But you also did this thing, which I loved, about mission alignment, evidence of growth, pattern of increasing complexity, and soft skills. Among the soft skills is this piece that was really about listening and empathy. I know that you listed that broad range of things, which I know you're giving all ample consideration to, but it reminded me in a way of, maybe game cards, even Pokemon. There are different abilities for every character, and there's a different composition for every person. So when it comes down to figuring out what's the right balance, can you give us a hint about how you deal with that? Because some people are more empathetic listeners, and that can be very valuable. Some people are more ready to then dive in. The person who ultimately is willing to ask, if that's the role, that's pretty important. If you are comparing that to a person who is a great listener but never makes the request for support or the invitation to give. So
Jay,
what do you do?
The easy answer is that there's never a perfect fundraiser. There's no such thing as the perfect fundraiser, and perfectionism really is endemic to the philanthropy community sometimes, and it's also endemic to people who may not be those Pokemon cards that you normally see, people who come from diverse communities as well, and so everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and so really you're assessing on the strengths, but you can see the weaknesses, and those are opportunities for growth. They're not weaknesses. Everybody has areas for growth, so those are the things that you want to be able to think about. But again, when you're thinking about having somebody who is a major gift officer and you really want to focus on, can they actually grow? You want to focus on that evidence and pattern, simply because you don't want to be using bias to discern, on the soft skills side, that actually can they do this. Now, when it gets to an alternative fundraising talent, somebody who's never been a fundraiser, then you're going to play more into the soft skills and trying to understand if they are a relationship builder. Have they actually engaged and actually moved some kind of relationship forward in a way that actually had some kind of impact or growth or benefit? So you have to think a little bit more differently for each of them. But everyone is all different. The high-performing fundraisers, the high-performing major gift officers are almost close in identity. They are just self-driven and high achievers, and they want to not hit goals, they want to exceed goals. So that's really what you're listening for that pattern. If they don't know their numbers, if you ask them, where was your numbers 2 years ago? That's not a good sign that they keep up in trying to achieve. So there's so many things that go to that question, Jay. It's a great question, but I'm always more on evidence-based, performance-based, rather than getting into too much of the areas where bias can creep in.
Well, in fact, that's kind of a final question for me anyway, which has to do, and there's bias loaded into this question, so I apologize for that in advance.
No worries.
But there's I hear a lot of talk about generational differences. I'm not saying how I feel about that, just that I hear that all the time from everywhere. So when it comes to that, do you see that we have to make adjustments when we think about recruiting this kind of the next generation, the people who are going to lead this field? Do we need to think about that composition maybe a little differently, or listen to the candidates a little differently to ensure that we're utilizing the best strengths of those people who are coming next?
Yeah, so I'm a Gen Xer, and millennials, I love millennials. I think millennials really have helped change a lot of the way that we are working, because they push more about how am I going to grow in this organization? How am I going to, what is my next step of moving forward? I know a lot of people who are older, Gen X or older, they're like, oh, I cannot, that's something I just deal with all the time. But the fact is that for millennials, they are driven for success, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. They ask a lot of questions. That's a good thing as well. Gen Zers actually have deep passion, and they are perfect for nonprofits. So you want to be able to start cultivating that next generation of future leaders. And if you're going to go and hire a new major gift officer, and they're going to be an alternative talent, why don't you think about if you want to have if your organization is focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, opportunity to hire somebody who might come from a community of color, to be able to look in those spaces and those pockets to be able to expand on. Many people think that some community colors are not as wealthier, but they actually are. There's deep pockets of wealth there. And there's a lot of opportunity for you to actually change the world and change the profession by actually thinking in those directions.
Right. And tremendous generosity in those communities as well.
Absolutely.
So thank you for all of that. We did have a question also about the those KPIs. And since that's all embedded in the slide deck, I believe I asked you this before, but I should ask you again from my memory. Will it be possible to share a PDF of the slides with the people who have joined us today?
100%.
Yes.
Happy to share.
And that's the idea and the intent, Jay, was just to make sure that people can have all the information they need. When that first question, when I saw it, was on the investing question. Mm-hmm. This is all material to take to back to your organization and say, we need to invest in major gift fundraising, and here's why. It's a long-term effort, but that's what investment's about, long-term growth of the organization.
And neither of you have asked me to say this, but I got to say, if you want to invest in something, you also invest a little time with people who know what they're doing and have done a lot of it very successfully. And that's, of course, people like the two of you and Campbell Company. So would you mind sharing how people can learn more about your work or follow you, whatever you like, in terms of making contact to learn more about this, to go beyond the time you've shared with us today?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're accessible through our website, campbellandcompany.com. You can just, it's all one word, campbellandcompany.com. And then also you can, check out our LinkedIn, check us out and just send us a message through LinkedIn if you want to. I love LinkedIn for that purpose itself. And my email is dan@campbellcompany.com. You're Cassie.Carter, right?
She's putting it in right now. Thank you.
Yeah, she's putting it right there already for us. So
yeah, thank you both very much. Really do appreciate what you were willing and able to share today. We know you're scratching the surface of something, but even this hopefully bolsters people's confidence about making the right investments so that they can welcome new donors into the pool and give them an opportunity to really help our organizations in ways that are meaningful to them and to us. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Jay. It's been a pleasure.
For having us today. Lots of fun.
I also want to thank all of you for hanging out with us today, or if you're watching this recording, for visiting this, and I encourage you to take your CFRE credit. This is a session that definitely earns it, as well as contributes to your knowledge. And to share it with your colleagues who will need this kind of evidence-based approach as they think about this subject. And also to encourage you to join us for the next sessions in our series. We have Shasta Keating coming up, director at TechSoup and the CEO at Arcason, who's going to be with us on Tuesday, October 17th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, talking about digital inclusion. And that's a good segue from our last conversation here. A multi-sector imperative in the age of AI and quantum computing. That is a mouthful, but basically what it boils down to is these two different discussions we're having about digital inclusion and about AI. They are together, and who better than somebody from TechSoup to tell us about that. We also have a big conference coming up on fundraising.ai Virtual Global Summit. That's October 23rd and 24th. I hope you sign up for that. And at the end of the month, we're doing our annual Horror Stories of Fundraising session. So if you have one and you want to tell us about it, I just heard one about a murder just 2 days ago. Go ahead and send it to me or contact me. We will make sure it's all anonymized. You can reach me at jay@donorsearch.net. That's JAY@donorsearch.net. Or for that matter, you can see recordings of this and all of our other sessions there, as well as our podcast, again, at donorsearch.net under the resources tab. And while you're there, I hope you'll check out a little more knowledge about your donors so you can talk to them about the things that matter to them as well as to you. And with that, I want to thank you for being here. Thank our guests again, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Till then, take care.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Jay.